was a great talk by August, talking about the built environment, the circular economy, sort of the top-down view. We've got three different approaches to actually making buildings more sustainable here on stage. I think maybe a good place to start is for just each of you to say, what your approach is, and then maybe throw a fact out there that our audience may not know about your particular approach. And maybe we'll start with you, Brendan.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Brendan. I'm the CEO and founder of Phalo Labs. We make systems that go directly on things in the built environment and solve the greenhouse gas emissions problem directly. So we actually have a lot of these in oil and gas and power and high-end aerospace, where you actually measure what's coming out of power plants and out of refrigerant units. We've been advantaging a lot of new technologies to take those same things and bring them down in scale and size and deploy them anywhere in the built environment, on boilers, on cogens, on heat pumps and AC units. And it turns out if you have bad emissions, you're probably wasting a lot of money. So there's a very practical upside to all of this, which is a well-emitting or low-emitting building usually is saving quite a bit of money. I guess it's like 10 o'clock in the morning, so we'll start with a nice depressing fact.
I think Bill already had that covered.
Is that why you started with me? I don't know. About 70% of the boiler systems we look at are leaking natural gas through their flue. This is an unforced error that's not really calculated in terms of the emissions coefficients or anything else. They're almost always easy to fix. You got to look for it first. There's our start. So if you measure what's actually coming out of the built environment, which we're not currently doing very well, we can have a really long lever arm on reducing the total emissions.
So, Lauren?
We focus on energy efficiency and electrification of single-family homes, which is our focus. Our approach to that is helping contractors sell more heat pumps. And in particular, we are the easy button to help them access utility and government rebates. So I'll say maybe a surprising fact that's maybe a little bit more optimistic than things that you've heard so far today is that the technology already exists to decarbonize homes, which is around 20% of greenhouse gas emissions in the US.
Excellent. It's time for wastewater.
Thanks for the shout out earlier. So I'm with Shark Energy. We are a Canadian wastewater energy transfer company. What that means is we are using the sanitary flow, basically the sewers, to do the same thing you do with GeoExchange. Heat source, heat sink. So it's urban geo, if you think about it. And I know there's a fact you're going to mention in one of my questions, so I'm going to save it for later. But
you can use it now.
No. So we have a box. We have two boxes. We have one box called the Piranha. If you put it in the basement of a multifamily residential building, and we can capture all the sanitary before it leaves that building, we can provide 91% of the domestic hot water for that building, only using the wastewater that's leaving the building. So it's almost a 1-for-1 ratio of like what's leaving and what can go back in.
So I want to sort of double tap on each of these. So why is the wastewater so hot? Like why? How are you capturing this heat? Like what's the difference that you're taking advantage of? NYSERDA calls it heat recovery. Heat recovery is part of it, but heat rejection is also part of it. So it's heat transfer. So we're pulling and pushing energy in and out of that sanitary stream. The reason why sanitary is so great is because wastewater leaving an apartment building is 72 degrees year-round. The water running through the sewers in New York City sewers or Washington, D.C. or Toronto stays anywhere from 50 degrees to 80 degrees year-round. So we've got consistent, never-ending supply of energy supply. So we're literally sitting on the world's largest, oldest, richest energy storage system. We just look at it as a way to get that away from me. We're saying that's fine, but before we push it down the line, let us put it into a tank, run it through our system, do some heat transfer, heat, cool, and make hot water for buildings. Excellent. And Lauren, you knew this was coming. How do heat pumps work? Like, it sounds like they work similar to this. No one knew about heat pumps 10 years ago. The technology's been around for a long time, but like, can you just explain how they work briefly, and then maybe give some examples of situations where they may not be the ideal solution?
Yeah, heat pumps work by transferring heat. A couple different types. Most of our customers use air source heat pumps, and so that's basically taking heat from the air and transferring it elsewhere. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that there's heat in the air even when it's very cold outside. So you can still get heat from like really in freezing temperatures from the air. Now I'll say heat pump technology has come a long way in the past 10 years. And now actually heat pumps can be appropriate in every single climate. Now in certain climates, for example, in Canada and the northern parts of the US, it's not necessarily cost effective to run a heat pump when it's 20 degrees outside, given how low the price of gas is. But a heat pump could do the job of heating an entire home, even in Wisconsin.
Cool. And you're going after the contractors now. You used to be more consumer focused. Can you talk a little bit about that shift?
Yes. So one of the things that we did as a direct-to-consumer business is we helped try to influence homeowners to get a heat pump when they were looking for a new HVAC system. But one thing we were never able to figure out is how to serve the reactive customer, basically. Most people buy a new heating and cooling system when their old one breaks, and typically it's an emergency, and you can't wait 4 to 6 weeks to get that installed. And so that's around 70% of the market. And so what we realized is really to have the market transformation that we were looking for is we had to focus on getting contractors, your local contractor, to recommend a heat pump to homeowners who needed a new heating and cooling system in an emergency. So that's why we pivoted to focusing on contractors as our customer.
So Brendan, first of all, I think we've talked about this before. I think the building efficiencies and the amount of waste that goes in your average building is something most people don't think about. You think about it when you walk by a building and you feel that gush of air conditioning hit you as you're passing by. But there are really, incinerators in most buildings that are completely inefficient, that may have been around for 50 years or longer. Can you talk a little bit about what you find when you go into these buildings and then how you make them better?
Yeah, it's amazing what you find in the buildings. When we walk around, so we're in New York, we're based in New York, we're over in the Brooklyn Navy Yards. But when you walk around cities, you usually are thinking about the emissions coming out of the cars, transportation, and potentially more industrial problems. But in New York City, the vast majority, the super majority of emissions are actually coming from heating and cooling our buildings. It's like over 70% last year in New York City. And of that 70%, terrifyingly, the dominant source is on-site petrochemical combustion for heating and cooling. So that's the boilers, that's the cogens, furnaces, domestic hot water. So we might think that we have made it into this new world with the the websites with the grasses flowing in the breeze, but we're not quite there yet. What we find, across a pretty wide array of different types of buildings, from Class A office space all the way down to low middle income communities, where we're trying to help out as well. We find that all buildings are unique, but they're all made up of the same stuff, if that makes any sense. So you'll find the same sort of thing and the same sort of problem basically on all scales. And what we find is a bunch of people who are trying to keep the built environment running, and they're stretched very thin. And that's kind of what we've been trying to do, is help them add tools to their tool belt so that they know when something is about to break. So they're not doing that emergency repair with a like for like, but say, all right, this thing's on its way out. If you can manage that, you can save money while you're managing it, and then you can have a much more cogent upgrade path to start pushing us towards that pure electric future.
So one of the things we talked about, the origin of a lot of climate tech is to solve the climate problem, but increasingly the conversation has been about saving money, and saving money as businesses, as individuals, as consumers. Can you talk a little bit about how you've sort of repositioned your offerings in order to provide that cost benefit and put that up front?
Do you want me to?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. We've always believed that focusing on climate and climate change is a losing strategy for sales. The reason for that is that there's plenty of people in this country that don't believe that climate change is a serious issue, and you can't limit your market to 50-60% of the country. The other thing is, for the people who do believe that climate change is a real challenge, that's not necessarily a reason to make a $30,000 purchasing decision, no matter how much you care about the environment. And specifically for contractors, which is our target customer, many of them are in like the 40% who don't believe that climate change is a problem. And so what we always believed is that you should focus on the value that a heat pump can provide to the homeowner in terms of making them more comfortable, making it safer, making it healthier for them and their family. And for contractors, focusing on you can make more money selling heat pumps. And those, I think, are the core value props. Energy saving, sometimes you have to be careful with. because especially when you're converting someone from heating with gas to going with electric, well, sometimes electricity is pretty expensive. Yeah, and so there are certain areas in the country where actually your operating costs will go up by switching to a heat pump. So I think that's important to be transparent with people that what they're getting is a higher quality system rather than necessarily saving money.
You want to comment on that?
Well, I was going to, very cogent. In New York City, we're asking building owners to throw all this money at their buildings to trade a commodity that costs 1x gas for a commodity that costs 4 or 5 times that in electricity. So, yeah, selling these types of technologies on a simple payback ROI is dangerous. But when you, especially in New York, where we have the value stack of NYSERDA PON 5547, where they're literally giving you 120 grand to do feasibility and design drawings, right? And now they're going to be announcing a tranche of implementation cash this fall, which is great. And on, the Inflation Reduction Act, investment tax credit, heat pumps, our technology, we've been told, qualifies for 30, 40, 50, maybe even a 60% tax credit. So when you start stacking up those smaller increments or chunks of financial benefit, and then you talk about, hey, your buildings can be cleaner so you can, potentially charge more rent, if you will, or attract and keep the gentleman was talking before about keeping tenants, keeping employees, having those greener, safer buildings, easier to breathe in, easier to live in, or easier to sell, if you will. So it's a challenge. It really is. Financial is a challenge.
I mean, we're at Climate Week, and I think I don't really know what that means, right? Because saying you work on climate is like saying you work on the internet. It's like, I got email too. Like climate actually is every single industry that we're talking about. When we try, I think that a lot of us, probably, definitely Thalo, we very much started with messaging around the co-benefits of reducing emissions. And we care about that. We have an internal ticker. We've touched like 80,000 metric tons already just in a few years. It's really cool. So it gets us up in the morning. That is no one's actual problem in a business, right? Like the externality of the rising amounts of greenhouse gases in the environment is not an immediate problem for anybody. But what is money, and oftentimes we actually can ROI, which is great. We usually ROI within a year. Because those same heat pumps that you install, a lot of times they're not charged very well or they leak through no fault of the heat pump. It's just during the installation, a lot of that is done manually. So if you can find a way to ensure that all this new stuff that we're putting in is operating at the highest possible efficiency, because a brand new heat pump with 30% of its charge lost, it's the hardest working compressor in show business, right? Like that's not going to save anybody any money. Our sustainability slides have sort of moved to the back of the deck as the we can save you money slides have moved further and further to the front. And I think that that's actually a very healthy and practical reality of how we live. I mean, all of us just said we install boxes of some variety. What a wonderful practical way of phrasing the climate revolution, right? It's like, yeah, we got boxes, we install them, it works. And that's a very different messaging from we need to solve greenhouse gases. It's no, we put this stuff in and it helps.
So if you had a policy wand that you could wave that could either change consumer behavior, change government programs, or just reduce an obstacle that you're facing in your business, what would it be? I know what yours is. Go ahead, make your pitch.
The New York City DEP needs to let us tap into the sewers. They handle 1.3 billion gallons of wastewater every day. The rule of thumb is 1 million gallons a day equals 1 megawatt of thermal transfer. So what we're doing is we're flushing 1,300 megawatts of thermal energy down the drain every single day in the city. So if we really want to decarb at scale and bring it to disadvantaged communities where it's hard to get geo, it's hard to get enough air source heat pumps in place, where we can now pick up the entire heating, cooling, and hot water load for a building just using sanitary, that's the biggest hurdle. When New York City gets in line with Washington, D.C., Toronto, Denver, Vancouver, Seattle, and joins, Sweden and Copenhagen and all the other international cities and really gets onto it, we will be able to decarbonize this city at scale. And we can tie into heat pumps and other technologies. We're imminently Canadian. We play well with others in the sandbox. There's no one silver bullet. So it literally takes a village or a city, if you will, to pull this off. So the DEP, once they come to the table, will be, and someone needs to help me. What do we say now instead of cooking with gas? We need like I need a new euphemism. So.
If I could wave my magic wand, I would have every single dollar in terms of government or utility incentives paid based on actual greenhouse gas emissions reductions to really align policy goals with the money that's being spent, just to hold programs, contractors, and all market actors more accountable. And I think it would benefit consumers a lot as well.
So depoliticize some of the way the funding is flowing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I get asked this question a lot, and capitalism works. So if you fine carbon, like that will drive consumer behavior and company behavior. If you stop subsidizing petrochemical extraction and use, that will also solve it pretty quickly. But all of those have very, very meaningful and painful economic components, right? Like there needs to be, I think, and forgive me, I know it's Climate Week, but like we do need to have a thoughtful process to get off of a fuel that's actually really pretty cool, right? Like it has a lot of power, and it just has this couple of problems that are causing some other downstream issues. If it didn't have that, it'd be great, right? But it does, and we need to find a way to accelerate that transition without causing, like, if you Thanos snapped and stopped all gas use today, we don't have all of our other stuff together quite yet. So I like things like Local Law 97 and other more local incentives that are sort of driving that. I think they should be a little bit more painful, and I think they should be a little bit more painful sooner, because they actually did drive a considerable amount of behavior. We're in New York. We talked to everybody 2-3 years ago. Everyone knows in their built environment, everyone knows what their emissions are because of Local Law 97. They know when they're going to get fined, whether it's this year or in 5 years. And they have some sort of plan to not have that fine or to deal with it. And the more we have that, and the more we have pretty aggressive sticks or carrots that are being used as sticks, I think that will be that will materially accelerate decarbonization.
Carrots used as sticks. I love it.
Like mixing metaphors. That's great.
That could work. Guys, thanks so much. These are all fascinating technologies, and it was a great conversation. Let's give them a big hand.